One of the many things that made the classic MacGyver such a watchable show back in the day was that when those opening credits were over and the episode faded in, you had no idea what kind of show you were about to get. In its early seasons, the show leaned pretty hard into international action-adventure stories, MacGyver sneaking into an oppressive Eastern Bloc country or South American military dictatorship to recover the wreckage of a crashed top-secret satellite or rescue some political prisoners. There were quite a few episodes like that, but there were also shows like Birthday, the 14th episode of MacGyver's second season, in which MacGyver stops to get some gas for his Jeep and winds up helping a pregnant woman flee from her murderous criminal husband. And if you still don't understand why I love MacGyver so much after hearing that premise, I don't know what to tell you. MacGyver might not be your thing. As the episode begins, it's early in the morning and MacGyver is on his way to do some fishing. He gets passed by a douchebag in a Corvette on the bridge, then pulls into a filling station to get $10 worth of gas, which, being that this is the mid-1980s, will probably last him about a month and a half. But things are not destined to go MacGyver's way. After he tops off his tank, MacGyver runs over a bottle as he's pulling out and blows out his rear tire. While MacGyver deals with his automotive-related problems, we cut to somewhere not too far away, and this lady, the extremely worried and extremely pregnant Elaine. She's digging through some records and does not seem at all happy with what she has found. Her husband, Andrew, he'd be the guy in the Corvette, arrives. It turns out Andrew is an ex-con. Elaine fell in love with him while he was in the joint, and when he got out, they got married and started a halfway house to give other felons a chance to get their lives back on track after they've served their sentences. Or at least, that's what Elaine thought until now. She's been here all night, looking over Andrew's records, and she's discovered that this isn't really a halfway house at all. It's just a front that Andrew's been using while he assembled his own private criminal army. Oh, that is so an Andrew thing to do. Elaine's got documents proving what Andrew's been up to. Andrew admits everything and menaces Elaine with a letter opener, but she knocks him unconscious with a paperweight and then, having had her fill of office supply-related violence, flees the house and runs off down the sidewalk. Andrew comes to and orders his goons, the residents of the supposed halfway house, to catch her and get those incriminating documents. Elaine makes it to the gas station and runs up to MacGyver just as he's about to drive off. Seeing that she's pregnant and obviously in distress, MacGyver says, "Are you about to have the baby?" And Elaine says, "No, I'm about to be murdered." Andrew's goons come screaming around the corner. Elaine jumps in the Jeep and MacGyver takes off. Hoping to evade the goons, Mac turns into the parking lot of an old abandoned factory. The goons give chase, but Mac slows them down by pulling a boat in front of them. Good thing there was a boat there. The factory is close to the docks, by the way. That'll end up being important. MacGyver drives on, but runs into a dead end. With the goons behind and a wall in front, MacGyver decides their only option is to head inside the factory. Mac hopes they can find a way out on the other side of the factory, but they never get that far. The bridge Mac tries to drive over to get across a big sunken track in the factory floor gives out, and the Jeep winds up stuck. Nice job, MacGyver. Andrew's goons break into the factory and hunt for Mac and Elaine, who have run off on foot. MacGyver takes one guy out by blasting him with some water as he passes by a valve. Jesus, how high was that water pressure that it knocked the dude unconscious? Then another goon finds Elaine cornered, and MacGyver swings down from the ceiling behind him and kicks him into the wall. Mac ties them up, drops a quip about how he's going to call their parole officers, then returns to Elaine, who announces that her water just broke, and also that she's giving the baby up for adoption because she's just discovered her husband is a violent criminal mastermind. While MacGyver tries to make Elaine comfortable as she experiences contractions, she dumps some backstory on him. She comes from a wealthy family, but she was never the smartest or the prettiest, and was more worried about helping others than living the high life. Starting the halfway house was her dream, and she thought it was Andrew's dream too. Deciding that the floor of an empty factory is no place to bring a child into the world, MacGyver returns to the Jeep, uses the winch to turn it around parallel to the sunken track, and drives off, hoping to find a way out of the building so he can get Elaine to a hospital. He makes a ramp with some abandoned boards conveniently left at the end of the sunken track. There's some suspense when the ramp gives out before the rear tires make it up, but thanks to the Jeep's four-wheel drive, they get out of the trench. Do you see why I say the Jeep is MacGyver's ideal vehicle? He uses the winch to pull it out of a tight spot. He uses the four-wheel drive to lift it out of the pit when the ramp breaks. It's tough, it's versatile, and you can't keep it down. It's the MacGyver of automobiles, that Jeep. What would Mac have done if this was a few seasons later and he was driving that vintage two-tone pickup? I'll answer, he would have been murdered. They both would have been murdered, and Andrew would have taken the documents and used his letter opener to cut the baby out of Elaine's belly, and he would have raised the baby up to be a criminal like him, and it would have been all MacGyver's fault for trading the Jeep for that fucking truck. That truck, I hate it! MacGyver tries to drive out of the factory, but just then Andrew shows up in the Corvette, so MacGyver's like, oh shit, never mind, and manages to pull the door back down in time to avoid getting shot by Andrew. A brief chase ensues. MacGyver drives onto a freight elevator, takes the elevator up to the top floor of the factory, loads the Jeep onto the end of a crane, and lowers it down to the street. Evading gunfire from Andrew and his goons, MacGyver drives across the factory to the other side and is just about to escape when even more of Andrew's goons arrive to cut him off. So, Mac turns around, heads back into the factory, escapes by smashing through a glass door, and pulls in next to a bunch of old abandoned vehicles, hoping to hide there while he improvises the next step of their escape. The plan, MacGyver explains as he piles junk around the Jeep to camouflage it from the goons, is to signal for help from the outside. He doesn't know how he's going to do that yet, but at least it's a start. One of the goons, the same one MacGyver knocked out with the water cannon, gets a little too close, so MacGyver knocks him out again, this time whacking him in the back of the head with a lead weight on the end of his fishing line. I know that guy's probably a scumbag, so I don't feel bad for him, but he's almost definitely got a traumatic brain injury at this point, wouldn't you think? MacGyver leaves Elaine to go find a way to send a message to the outside. He's hoping there's a flare gun in one of the boats parked nearby, but the best he can manage is some signal flags. So he grabs the flags that spell out the word help, takes a second to smash another goon into unconsciousness using his fishing pole and the arm of one of the boats, then creates a makeshift balloon using a fabric bag, some filthy water from an old tire, and helium from a conveniently available tank. The balloon takes off, but before anyone helpful can see it, Andrew's remaining goons see it too. One of them takes off after it on his motorcycle, but MacGyver and his trusty fishing rod handle him no problem. Some cops see MacGyver's balloon and signal flags and radio for help. Meanwhile, Andrew discovers Elaine in the Jeep, hidden among the wreckage, and moves in for the kill. He's like, Elaine, you are such a bleeding heart. What a sucker. As if I, Andrew, master criminal, would ever truly fall for a woman like you. He's about to shoot Elaine when MacGyver reaches out from under the Jeep, trips Andrew, pulls him under as well, and punches him out. I think punching Andrew hard enough to knock him unconscious while they were both underneath a Jeep is the most impressive thing MacGyver does in the entire episode. How'd he even find the room to swing? He truly is a resourceful man, isn't he? With Andrew taken care of and help on the way, MacGyver's like, well, Elaine, I guess that wraps it up. But Elaine's like, I'm having the baby. The baby? Now? Oh, shit. Could you maybe just have the baby during the last ad break? It's coming up in just a second. I mean, it feels a little anticlimactic after all of this, but sure. And that's what happens. After watching MacGyver and his very pregnant new friend Elaine run for their lives while she's going into labor for an hour, we get to the final commercial break, come back, and she's already had the baby, and it's a girl. And despite considering adoption earlier in the episode, Elaine has decided to keep the baby, on a trial basis at least. Yeah, MacGyver says, I hear a lot of people are doing that. Birthday is one of my favorite episodes of MacGyver. There are things about it which I enjoy ironically for how corny and ridiculous they are, and there are also things about it which I enjoy because I think they're examples of genuinely good writing. That's the thing about MacGyver. It's mostly a so bad it's good kind of show, but every once in a while you get an episode like this, which, at least in large part, is just plain good. First, the ridiculous stuff. Talk about a melodramatic premise. Pregnant social worker discovers her husband is secretly a gangster who has been using her halfway house to assemble a criminal crew and flees with incriminating evidence while the husband and his murderous thugs give chase. The script really goes all out to make Elaine as vulnerable and as sympathetic as possible. She's a good person who's been taken advantage of. Her heart has been broken. Her self-esteem is in the toilet. She's about to pop. And on top of all that, she's running for her life. Okay, fine. You got me. I'm rooting for her. Add to that overwrought premise some reliably goofy 80s action tropes like denim-clad bad guys on motorcycles, multiple games of cat and mouse in an abandoned factory, and how absurdly easy it is for the hero to render the villains unconscious, and you've got yourself some quality cheese all gooey and bubbly and delicious. The plot of Birthday is almost perversely repetitive. MacGyver and Elaine drive into the factory, they're trapped, they escape, they're cut off by the bad guys, they drive back into the factory, they're trapped, they escape, they're cut off by the bad guys, they drive back into the factory. This cycle goes on and on, repeating itself until finally MacGyver says, you know what, we're just gonna hide. To hell with this. And that eventually leads to their victory over the evil forces of Andrew. But it's within that repetition that we find the actual good writing I was talking about earlier. There is a lot of sameness in the episode, generally speaking, but in the details of that sameness, there's a lot of very clever invention. In a show, and beyond that a genre, known for its reliance on preposterous plot contrivances, the obstacles MacGyver and Elaine encounter all emerge fairly naturally from the situation. Fleeing Andrew's goons, they take shelter in the old factory, and that decision sets the course for the remainder of the episode. The Jeep gets stuck, so they flee on foot. The goons follow them inside. MacGyver subdues them, figures out a way to free the Jeep, tries to leave the factory, runs into Andrew, goes back in, finds another way out. The crane this time gets cut off again, so back inside the factory again. Every time the cycle repeats, things go a little differently. Mac and Elaine encounter different challenges, and Mac has to invent a new way around them. When they finally escape the factory for good but are still forced to hide from the goons, Mac uses what he has at his disposal to take out the goons still hunting them. He takes out 3 of them using his fishing pole, which is introduced in the very first scene. And he uses the fishing pole in 3 different ways. Then, sticking with the fishing and boating theme, sends up a call for help using the signal flags. Because we spend so much time in the factory and the surrounding area, and because we've known he has his fishing gear with him since the beginning of the episode, MacGyver's creative solutions feel even more resourceful than they otherwise might have. In a more typical episode, MacGyver would find himself in the factory for the final showdown with the villain, and he'd improvise some kind of weapon from items he found lying around, and that would be that, and it would probably be fine. In Birthday, MacGyver and Elaine drive back and forth through the factory so many times that MacGyver has to improvise multiple different attacks and escapes in the same setting. That story structure not only emphasizes MacGyver's improvisational genius, it also gives the episode a sense of cohesion and unity. Because by the time it's all over, we really feel like both the premise of the story and its primary setting have been thoroughly explored. Adding to that sense of unity is the fact that the story unfolds more or less in real time, which means it has a unity of time as well as mostly unity of place. It feels like not only MacGyver and Elaine have been caught up in this unexpected adventure, but so have we. Another element that makes this such an enjoyable episode is the chemistry between MacGyver and Elaine. There are bits here and there where Elaine teeters on the precipice of being too pathetic, too down on herself, too helpless, too hilariously in jeopardy, but she never falls in. MacGyver occasionally tries to boost her confidence and to nudge her toward keeping the baby rather than handing it over for adoption, but those beats aren't hit too hard. Most importantly of all, while Mac and Elaine eventually develop a close rapport, there's never a hint of romance between them. Elaine is not presented as a love interest, and MacGyver never seems motivated by anything other than a desire to do the right thing and help her out of this urgent, life-threatening jam she finds herself in. Finally, even though I made fun of it in my plot summary, I admire the choice to just skip the arrival of Elaine's baby altogether. Because she's pregnant and because the birth is presented as imminent for the entire episode, you naturally expect that we're gonna get a MacGyver delivers a baby scene. The first time I ever watched this episode, and that's going back a way, I assumed the delivery would be MacGyver's final act of improvisation. They'd be trapped somewhere, Andrew would have been dealt with somehow, and then MacGyver would have to, I don't know, fashion a swaddle wrap out of a section of a sail scavenged from one of the boats. And, of course, he would cut the umbilical cord with his trusty Swiss Army knife. But that doesn't happen. The episode subverts that expectation entirely. We don't get that scene at all. We get a panicked MacGyver facing Elaine's insistence that the baby is coming right now, then a commercial break, and then a brief epilogue where the birth has already happened, and mother and newborn daughter are just fine. It's a risky move, it's audacious, but it works because when you think about it, it makes sense from a storytelling point of view. After all, we're in the final moments of the episode anyway. The main conflict is over. Andrew has been dragged under the Jeep and socked out. The birth of Elaine's child is a foregone conclusion at that point. So, the episode treats it that way and just skips past it. You know that thing you assumed was going to happen? Well, it happened, and it turned out just like you thought it would. It's kind of brilliant. One of the things that sets MacGyver apart from other similar shows is that MacGyver himself is not just the protagonist, he is the premise of the series. That's why you never know what you're going to get when you watch an episode for the first time. It could be a spy story, or a heist story, or a crime story, or an earnest social issue story. The only thing you can reliably predict is that MacGyver is going to figure in somehow. MacGyver's who ties it all together, and MacGyver's who makes it work. There's a beat relatively early in the episode when they've evaded Andrew's goons for the first time, and it looks for a moment like they might get away, when Elaine says to MacGyver, "It looks like I finally met the right man at the right time." A moment later, they pull up to a dead end and realize they're trapped, and MacGyver says, "I wouldn't be too sure." It's the whole series in a nutshell, in a way, because MacGyver is the right man at the right time. But being the right man at the right time means that he's constantly finding himself trapped and having to scramble for a way out. It's not due to any fault of his own, usually. It's just that he lives in an 80s action-adventure series, and watching him scrambling for a way out is the fun part. For us, anyway. Not so much for him. I don't feel too bad for MacGyver, though. It always works out for him in the end. And Birthday, it works out for Elaine, too. And most especially for her baby. If not for MacGyver and his Jeep, that kid would have grown up with Andrew as a father. You can't do much worse than that. On the other hand, when it comes to positive role models, you can't do much better than our mullet-sporting, fishing pole-wielding hero. After all, as the saying goes, anyone can be a father, but it takes a real man to be MacGyver.